Hey everybody, Nate here from WASD20. Welcome back to the dungeon. This is part 3 in creating a dungeon, a series I started to show you how to create dungeons from the ground up. We are today going to be focusing on filling the dungeon that we have created with all sorts of wonderful creatures for your players to play with. Yay! Hooray! So yeah, today's goal is going to be getting this dungeon filled with all sorts of creatures, encounters, and all sorts of challenges for your players to prepare it for an actual session of D&D. So let's get going and let's get down to it. So if you have not seen part 1 and 2 yet, I definitely recommend you go and check those out. In part 1, we talked about what a dungeon is, how they are useful in Dungeons and Dragons, as if it isn't already very obvious. But in part 2, then we drew the map, and we talked about how I draw dungeon maps and just talked about some different methods and some considerations as you draw out a map for your dungeon. In part 3 here, we're actually going to be planning the encounters. We're not going to get super detailed down to every last stat block and feature of every NPC or anything like that. But we'll get a fair amount of detail here, and it will definitely be enough that when we're done, you'll have the basics of a dungeon that you could run in your game world too. I've been dragging my feet for a while on this one because honestly, it's not super in my wheelhouse. It's not one of my strengths. I'm not a long-time DM for which this comes very naturally, yet I'm getting there. And I do feel like I'm a pretty good DM, and I can run a dang good session of D&D, and when I got stuck on this one, I went to the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group, where I always go when I'm stuck, and people helped me out. People jumped in and said, well, here's some of the things that I usually include in dungeons. So I'm here to share some of their wealth of knowledge as well. So what are some of the things that you would want to think about including in a dungeon as you actually prepare it for encounters and for running a session? So here are some of the things that I recommend including, and I got some of these ideas from the guys on the AbTab group, but a story. A story is a good place to start because once you have a story for your dungeon, it tends to kind of build itself. Monsters, creatures, things for your players to fight. Puzzles, those are always a good thing to have in dungeons. Traps as well. Secrets, maybe it's secret doors, trap doors, secret rooms, etc. Role-playing challenges. Do you want to have any role-playing in this dungeon? Perhaps even some NP, let's fix that, C's. There we go. Skill checks and hazards, all sorts of challenges. And it might be good to also intentionally write down some record about the ambiance, the description, some adjectives to make this place feel more alive. So these are not necessarily an exhaustive list of things that you must have or all the things that you could potentially have in a dungeon, but these are some things that I thought are things to consider including in each dungeon. And some dungeons, some groups are going to be way more into combat and just want lots of that. Other times they're really going to want their brain muscles to be exercised, and so they're going to want some puzzles, some riddles, and some real problem solving. So it totally depends on your group and your style as a DM. Alright, so naturally, where are we going to start with the dungeon? We're going to start with a story. And I didn't really have a super strong story in mind. I mentioned that this Watcher's Gorge here, the dungeon we drew last time, was carved by giants who were mining this area. And so I imagine these gorges were actually carved over a period of time. But that's not going to have much to do with it right now in the immediate session that we're running. We could get to that history later. But for now, what I'm thinking is there is an evil presence that has been felt in the region. And recently, the body of a well-known ranger known as the Watcher was washed up on the shores of a river near the town of Copeland Stream. A brave group of adventurers travels to the gorge where he was known to dwell from time to time. And so that's the reason for this name, Watcher's Gorge, which I didn't actually know up until about 5 minutes ago. But that's it. The Watcher, right? It makes sense. So he was maybe an elven ranger who had, watched this area for perhaps centuries and is now sadly dead. And people are angry. People are upset. People want to know what happened. People are frightened. Now, this evil presence that is being felt, I'm leaving it intentionally kind of vague so that you can fit this into your game world. But based on your feedback from last time, I got a lot of good suggestions about the monsters that could possibly be here. And I asked you guys to give me some ideas, and you did. All kinds of ideas were given, and I can't find the piece of paper that I wrote them all down on. But, some people mentioned, for example, having a young blue dragon with a pack of kobolds. Perhaps some mephits, perhaps some, what else? People said goblins, There were all sorts of suggestions for this area, but I decided to go with knolls. Someone mentioned that, and I thought that's a good idea. I'm a really big fan of knolls. In case you don't know what a knoll is, they're a classic D&D monster. They're these kind of evil, fierce-looking hyena-type creatures that I think at one time were hyenas, but they were twisted through some kind of demon lord. Yenoghu. Yenog. Ye-eggnog. Yenahu. Yeah, something like that. So anyway, gnolls are pretty beefy, fierce, grotesque characters, and I really like them. So we're going to include some gnolls here, and we are going to have some sort of fiendish presence as well. That's what has brought the gnolls here. And I imagine that there's going to be some kind of minor minion of perhaps a demon lord or something like that who is present here with the gnolls. Very, very minor, because I want to keep this encounter doable for a very low-level party. I'm thinking, I want people to be able to just take it and run with it. So we're talking levels 1 through 5 somewhere in there, and it just depends how you stat things out, really. And I like to have a lot of flexibility in that. And so we'll flesh that out as we go. But this is the basic story, something pretty vague that someone could take and run with. All right, the next thing we need to do is I like to number the rooms in my dungeon. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. I'm going to number these in Photoshop, and we'll take a look when we're done. That will help us be able to plan out these encounters once we have the rooms numbered. So we've got 1 through 10 here, just some different locations. I also added a scale here so that we can see, how many feet a square equals. Each square is roughly 5 feet. And that should help us out as well. So next up, we're going to be taking these numbers and we're going to be transferring them onto our notes here. You'll be able to see whatever I post down in the description below. I will post the updated dungeon map. I will post my notes for this dungeon so that you can actually take it and use it if you want to. So room number 1 here, it's actually not a room, it's one of the entrances. So this is a smaller entrance down here, an entrance to kind of a side cavern, and this one I imagine is a cave. Okay, it actually goes underground here. I didn't represent that very well on the map, but that's what I'm imagining for 1, 2, and 3 here, that they're all actually underground and they go pretty deep. This one is not going to be easily found, but perhaps if you want the players to find it, you could have them hear a moan from here, and we'll find out what that moan is momentarily. So I thought that in room number 2, we would have a gnoll helping a halfling prisoner get a drink. So this is just going to be a standard gnoll. He's got a club, and the moan would have been this gnoll actually beating this prisoner and basically making him like fill a bucket of water or a water skin or something like that. And then in room number 3, if they continued, they'd have to cross this river, take a leap or something like that, and there would be 2 more prisoners here. 1 human, an elderly man, and a halfling female. If I were going to be running this session, I would probably want to give them names, give them some characteristics, some personality, just in case the players interact with them a lot more. And that's where we can get some of this right here, some RP challenges. So yeah, it'd be probably a good idea to look in your Dungeon Master's Guide or to look some stuff up online, or just come up with it off the top of your head, make up some NPCs, and that way if the players decide to role play, these people can talk to them. Now you can decide how you want to work that. Perhaps they are very downtrodden and don't want to help and just are resigned to their fate, near suicidal. Perhaps they are saying, "Free me and I'll help you," and perhaps they actually help you kill this gnoll once the party attacks this gnoll to perhaps free the prisoners. Perhaps they don't encounter rooms 1, 2, and 3 at all, and they just go straight to 4, the main entrance of this dungeon. So these are all things that you can think about depending on what you want to do in the session. In terms of dungeon dressing, that's something else to think about too. You want to have some things that are going to help this place feel lived in, like a living, breathing place. Now, it just so happens that these gnolls are a fairly recent occupants of this dungeon. Before this it had been guarded and used by the Watcher. So perhaps there's some military equipment. Perhaps there's some maps and tables and stuff that the Watcher used here. Perhaps there's a stash of goods, of treasure, of things that the Watcher had kept here. Who knows? You can kind of make that up. But I imagine there's going to be some supplies. There's going to be a table, chairs maybe, some torches, perhaps a small fire. And of course there is access on this right here to this underground river, which takes, if the PCs decided to jump in and follow it, would take them into this pool right here. That might be a foolhardy thing to do, but that's a place where you could have a skill challenge. You know, maybe it's a constitution or strength check to hold their breath there, and or to swim. And not get, you know, banged into the rocks here or whatever it might be. All right, but anyway, getting to item number 4 here, this is the main entrance. This will be the more obvious entrance to the players. There are echoes, it's loud, there's rushing water, the sound of rushing water, and the reason I'm doing that is actually to keep, it's kind of a practical thing, to keep potential fights isolated to one room, so that if the PCs engage in an encounter, a battle in one room, not everyone necessarily comes rushing, okay? So that's something to think about too. You also might want to ask your players, are you trying to be quiet? Are you trying to be cautious here? And it's okay to ask them leading questions like that sometimes if you, I don't know. I think it's fine to do. If they continued up the path here, they would have a branch right here and be able to go to room 5 or up here to location number 6. So let's talk about these. So in room number 5, I'm imagining there are 2 gnolls. I imagine they're sleeping. And, you know, give these guys some characteristics. Give them, you know, one of them has one eye. One of them could be missing an arm. Who knows? Give these guys some unique and interesting characteristics. I imagine they're smelly. They're gross. They smell them way before they see them. And it's just extremely dirty. There's a chest with some broken weapons and small buckler maybe, some things like that. Nothing very useful. Perhaps it smells of feces. It's gross, okay? That's what I'm imagining this little gnoll dwelling here. Perhaps there are some bedrolls laid out, but I imagine probably just beds of straw, piles of straw. All right, so those gnolls are sleeping. The PCs could decide to try to kill them in their sleep, sneak up on them, could try to go in screaming and hollering and totally ambush them. Or, you know, if you want a little more challenge, make the gnolls up and alert. Perhaps they are sharpening their spiked clubs or just stoking a fire and drinking or who knows what. Do gnolls drink? I don't know. All right, and then here at location 6, this is on a very narrow and steep ledge, so I'm going to write that in here actually. Now, you could have your players need to make a skill check even to walk along this path if you think it's that narrow. Or, so you could do that. You could have some loose rubble that they need to cross very carefully if you want to make it a little more of an obstacle. I just have put in a minor obstacle here. It's a trap, but it's really just one of these traps that it's an inconvenience. It's not very well done. It was made hastily. Perhaps this group of gnolls actually heard the PCs coming, so they threw something together real quick, hoping to do some damage, but it wasn't done very well. So it's just kind of a pile of rubble and small rocks that's up ahead, held by some boards or by a stone or something like that. And it needs to be triggered remotely with an arrow or with a rock thrown or some kind of other projectile. So it's basically a little rock slide trap. If you want to make it beefier, you could absolutely up the damage. You could also make it so they have to make a save in order to avoid being knocked into the water down below. That could be a cool thing you could do, but I'm just keeping it very simple, minor inconvenience. I'm kind of thinking level 1 party or maybe level 2. They're able to spot this trap with a DC 13 perception check. It disarms very easily. They can just kind of throw something at it once they find it to disarm it. If it is triggered by a gnoll hunter who is on the bridge, location number 7, or perhaps 9, could be either one. There's a gnoll hunter with a longbow, and the gnoll hunter has to try to hit or maybe throw a rock or a spear at the trap in order to trigger it. But I imagine a bow would be best. Try to trigger this, knock the board down. That will then send these rocks tumbling down onto your PCs, or at least maybe onto the first 1 or 2 in line. More if you want to make it more challenging. All right, so a DC 15 dexterity save can have the damage, and it's just 2d4 bludgeoning damage. Again, it's hardly anything, I realize that. I just want to kind of spice things up here and keep the players on their toes without doing a ton of damage, so that they can still have kind of a cool boss fight at the end here, sort of. And it was also a suggestion from someone in the comments on YouTube that the bridge, number 7, looked like just a natural place that you would want to have a ranged attack come at the PCs while they're kind of pinned against this narrow ledge. It really works well. And so even if the PCs do, make it disarm the trap, you could still have this gnoll firing at them potentially. Now, here's what gets a little bit complicated, and I'm just realizing that maybe I didn't think it through super well, but I kind of had in mind that the PCs would have a chance to get to room number 8 before they encounter anything in 9 or 10. So I'm not quite sure what I'm doing there yet, but here's what I have in mind for room number 8. First off, room number 7 we can say is just a narrow bridge. And room number 8, we can say, is sort of a puzzle room. All right, so here's what I have in mind. There are scattered bones, and the PCs wouldn't necessarily know that they're the bones of gnolls. Maybe they'd see a skull or something like that. But there's basically the scattered bones of 2 gnolls. Perhaps there's still a tiny bit of flesh on these bones, but they're pretty well picked over. All right. I had in mind that if the PCs assemble these bones, if the party actually puts them together to look like a gnoll, then it would come to life. That it's got some sort of magic here. Perhaps one of the greater lords, I'm thinking, left these as a fail-safe for the lower minion in case the gnolls turned against him. All right. So perhaps there was a necromancer or something like that, or perhaps it's a high-level sort of demonic warlock, fiendish warlock, who is kind of overseeing these gnolls, has left. But has left just a little bit of protection here in the form of these basically gnoll skeletons. Now, I thought maybe I could use the gnoll witherlings, which are in Volo's Guide to Monsters here. Pretty cool looking, and yeah, that could work. Or you could just kind of combine and make, look at a skeleton, look at a gnoll stats, and kind of put some things together there. But the gnoll witherling would absolutely work. If you read the description, you would find, that's not really what it is. But I just grab things and use them. You'll find very rarely follow monsters exactly as written. I take inspiration, I adjust stats. So yeah, I'm just taking and tweaking the stats and doing all kinds of stuff. So I had in mind that these could be gnoll witherlings, that could work pretty well in terms of stats. They're not very challenging, so if the PCs manage to assemble them, they will only attack other gnolls. Now, how would they know to do this? And I'm not totally sold on this. If you have better suggestions, I'd love to hear from you. I'm not very good at making my own little riddles or anything. But I have in mind that perhaps this powerful warlock who was in charge here left behind some kind of ragged tome, and that there's this other, we'll say, cultist fanatic or something like that. It may be a very low-level warlock who knows that it's there and knows that there is the opportunity for help there. So he leaves this book perhaps in a little alcove off to the side on some sort of natural shelf. And the PCs can see this pretty easily. They turn to the page that is bookmarked, and written in the page is, "Together the bones to fight their own." And that's not very hard. So maybe you guys come up with something a little more challenging here. I think it's pretty obvious, but that's something the PCs could do. And then they would have some allies. And these gnoll witherlings would immediately start walking across the bridge, I imagine, just kind of be descriptive in how they kind of crack together and how they're sort of, just forming and slowly and kind of creakily getting up, but walking determinedly off that bridge, basically going straight for any other gnolls. These are going to be mindless. I don't know if gnoll witherlings are necessarily mindless, but these ones are, okay? So again, always kind of twisting the stats and just doing what I want. Sorry, I'm a rebel. All right, so now the 2 last rooms here I planned out a little bit, and number 9 and 10. So 9, I was thinking to have some gnolls hanging out here, but again, it kind of didn't make too much sense for me because I did want the players to get to room number 8 before they encountered too much more, so that these gnoll witherlings could be of some use potentially to the players. Now, I do want to recognize that if you have these NPCs perhaps that the party rescued who has actually joined in and wants to help the party, this can get a little crazy here. This could be a little overwhelming. And so I would just say, keep it very simple. A lot of times I'll just say, I don't have very good stats for these. Maybe each one of these NPCs has like a +1 to attack. They're just using stones and, 1d4 damage, 1d6 damage, something, probably 1d4, something super simple. Just keep it really simple. You could roll once for all 3 of them if they're joining in. You could do the same thing with the Null Witherlings. You could just make it really simple, roll once for both of them. And yeah, just don't get overwhelmed, I guess, is something to keep in mind if you're a new DM. And so now in room number 9, I just kind of have some flavor, some dungeon dressing. We've got some scattered bones, a rotting corpse perhaps of a human or something, perhaps another halfling. Perhaps these gnolls have actually been eating some of the prisoners. Ew, that's gross. And perhaps a rack of weapons like some clubs and some spears, rough hide armor. I thought, it's always fun to have a wolf chained up too, because, the players could also free this. Now I'm getting a little crazy. I'm getting carried away, guys. Somebody stop me. We've got 3 NPCs, we've got 2 Null Witherlings, and potentially a wolf fighting along with the party. So yeah, stop me there. Nope, we're killing the wolf. Okay, the wolf is gone. All right, so anyway, and then the last little bit here, I was thinking that there would be a warlock or cult fanatic, pretty weak and low level, but someone who can sling some spells at these, and someone who maybe has a scroll or some item that can also raise some of these bones. Now, it depends on how beat down your party is. Is your party pretty low, or are they doing just fine? I have a feeling if you've been following my recommendation, they're probably doing just fine, and this can be a pretty big, bad fight. And so stick it to them. Raise up some skeletons, and we're going to add a gnoll with a big club. And just boost his stats, just give +2 to everything. Just up it up. And we'll also have our Gnoll Hunter. I imagine that the Gnoll Hunter who is firing at the PCs may have escaped from location number 7 or 9 and run up to 10 here. Perhaps now the Warlock has had time, if the Hunter made it out, to give word to the Warlock and the bigger, badder Gnoll, then perhaps they are now prepared and they are ready to ambush the players as they approach. That could be. There's also this ledge here. I imagine this is just kind of a 5-foot ledge here. So the players shouldn't have too much trouble getting up there to location number 10. And perhaps even those in location number 10 have already started and are waiting. And the encounter could happen on the bridge. Yeah, that would be intense, right? So anyway, there's lots of fun options, lots of good things you can do here. And yeah, that's kind of what I got for you guys. I don't know. Let's see how we did on these right here. Do we have a story? We have a story. Do we have monsters? We have a monsters. Do we have a puzzle? Yeah, kind of. It's a little riddle. It's not real difficult. Do we have traps? Yeah, we have a trap. Not a real difficult one. We've got secrets. Yeah, you've got this secret door over here, and you've got kind of this more hidden entrance over here in number 1. Do we have some RP challenges? Again, where I would see that probably coming into play is in room number 3 here with the prisoners, and room number 2, right? How do you want, are the players going to have to really convince these prisoners, go, run, be free, get out of here, or join with us and fight, or how's that going to go? That's kind of up to you to decide. And maybe it depends on the direction your campaign is taking as well. And perhaps some of these prisoners could even be, if this is an ongoing campaign, some NPCs that the players have encountered before. Up the stakes a little bit, huh? Ambience and description, I didn't include too much of that here. We had a little bit of stink here or there. You've got the sound of rushing water, but it's always important to keep that in mind. And if that doesn't come naturally to you, write it down. Write down a few adjectives, a few descriptive terms that you can use in each room. And it can really help kind of bring this dungeon to life. All right. This is sorta kinda how I do dungeons. I'm still learning and developing my own methods, but I want to thank you guys for joining me. I am very much open to your feedback here, and you can find a link to this. I'll put it in the description below, so you can have access to the map and to the actual notes here of what's in this. If you use it, I would love to hear from you how it goes. And if you're looking to share ideas with me outside of the comments here, if you want to share pictures and things like that of your own dungeons, follow me on Facebook, guys, and share these things with me on Facebook or on Twitter. Links are in the description. And one more thing I want to say here is if you're a fairly new DM and this stuff is really hard for you, I did just add a new option on the Patreon page at the $25 level. There's a new reward for you to get a 1-hour consultation with me once a month. And it can be a time where we, just jam and kind of share ideas, and I can give you some ideas and help you build out a session, a campaign, some NPCs, some monsters. I could even help you on a map if you want. So that's something you can check out over on my Patreon page. Link to that in the description below as well. And yeah, I think that's it, guys. I have a feeling this one got a little long here, long-winded, but it takes time to plan out a session. So anyway, I'm sorry if I didn't give very much detail here, but I didn't want to get into stat blocks and all that because I did want to keep it as brief as possible. And you guys can go look that stuff up on your own. All right, enough from me. I'm about to lose my voice. All right, everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.